The three phases of development of FLT. FLT is female literary tradition. Female literary tradition. Three phases of female literary tradition, as per Ellen Showalter, is the first is that of imitation. Imitation is the characteristic feature of this stage. She later on gives a different name to it. I'll not give you the name yet. I'll tell you I'll work on a stage by means of its characteristics. The first is that of imitation. What does that mean? She says that in the female writing tradition, if you try to trace history, you find that the writers that the female writers we initially had are those female writers who are writing. There is a female literary tradition, and you find that these writers are in all kinds of cultures. It's not just in England that you have these people who are writing. Coming back to the date when Ellen Showalter is writing this text, it's 1977. All other theories are already there in place. Post-colonial criticism, slave narratives are there. Marginalization studies have started. Gender studies has queer theory has already started. So when she studies this imitation stage, she does not only study imitation in England or English literature, but in all subcultures as well. She says that it's not just in England that she finds this imitation happening of male literary tradition by women, but in subcultures also, which means the writings done by black women, the writings of Jewish women, the writings of Anglo-Indian women. They all are following the same pattern of writing. What is the pattern? What are the characteristics? The characteristic is that of imitation. In the first stage, and in all these subcultures, you will find they all follow the same stages, which we are going to deal with. That all women of these subcultures follow these stages. The first is imitation, where the modes of dominant tradition are imitated. The dominant tradition is the one followed by men. Dominant tradition is imitated. So when a female starts writing, be it in any period of time, when she is trying to start writing, and it's for the first time that women from, say, a black community starts writing, what does she do? She says she falls back upon the dominant tradition of men and imitates it. Or say somebody is writing, a Jew is writing about the Holocaust. This female will also fall back upon the dominant tradition how men have started writing. Let's not deal with these. Let's take our own tradition where we find that Kashmiri men have started writing about the experiences that they have faced during the 90s, when militarization started. Militarization of the country started in 47, and then after that in 90s, when protest and rebellion begins. You feel that if a woman starts writing about the same kind of experiences, she will first fall back upon the dominant tradition and start imitating it. What have other writers done? They are talking about the prison narratives. They talk about the people who were accused of the crime and how they were treated in the prisons, how it changed their lives. Or they talk about half mothers. They talk about half widows. A female who picks up on the same dominant tradition will imitate the male dominant idea of writing. That's the first stage. Their artistic standards are defined by this dominant tradition, this male tradition. This is the artistic standard for them. Because they at this time have still internalized their roles as writers. They have internalized the tradition that I said for writing you need to read, and what they are reading, they have internalized that. And having internalized these social roles, they work by the same artistic standards. Clear? Is the first stage of imitation clear with you? Should I move on to the next? The next one we have, the next phase of writing in any female literary tradition is that you find the next stage will be that of protest. Only once this literary tradition has gone through imitation, like in Kashmiri female writing, we haven't yet completed this stage of imitation. So we are not there yet in the protest stage. In the protest stage, the female writers start protesting against the set standards, that the standards set by a male writing tradition are not the standards meant for a female. So they rise against those set standards and try to write against the dominant tradition, protest against the dominant tradition, which is that of men. I'll give you examples. When I give you the names she gives to these waves, I'll also give you the examples that come in each. You will remember the words though, imitation, protest, and the one that follows. The writers here, the female writers, they call for autonomy. Autonomy means that we have our own right and we can write the way we wish to write. We have an autonomy on our own product of creativity. So, in our autonomy, we don't need to go by set standards of the dominant tradition. We can create our own standards. This protest of creating their own standards is the second stage of such a writing. This happens with black writing, where black women start protesting against the writing of the black men. This happens with Jewish writing, anti-Semitists writing. Now, females rise against and say, no, your experiences are totally different. So, your standards are not my standards. I have my own standards, and I will not go by the dominant tradition, but I call for my autonomy. Same goes with Anglo Indian writing, where female writers now protest that your idea of British colonialism is not the same as my idea of British colonialism. So, I will have my own standards of writing, not like yours. Clear? This is the protest phase. The third is self discovery. After searching for an autonomy, after having found a new set of rules by which she will work on her piece of work, unlike the dominant tradition, what do these writers find? In this stage, the females turn inward. They turn inward means they don't look for standards outside from the society, from what they experience in the real world, but they turn inward into their heads, the experiences as they figure them out in their conscious, unconscious, and subconscious. They turn inward. In this way, they are freed from some dependency. We don't say completely, but at some to some extent they are freed from some dependency of opposition. That if you have opposition would be the male female dichotomy. This male female dichotomy is not too much to be depended upon when a female turns inwards. Inwards, she has her own world where she is free from the dependency of the opposition. Then what is she doing by means of this? She is in search of her own identity. She is in search of her own identity. And this is what continues to happen to this day. We are still in female literary tradition going through this self-discovery where female is looking for an identity which is not dependent on male-female dichotomy. And they are still failing, and in my opinion, they'll continue to fail because nothing exists beyond male female dichotomy. You can reject the idea, you can disagree with me, but this is what I believe, that this kind of a search for identity, independent of male existence, is never possible, and therefore this will continue to be a question mark. Any questions so far? Now, going into the depth of the search for the history of tradition, what does she find? She says that she starts studying history, and she finds the first stage she calls, like I said, the stage where imitation is done. She calls this phase, she calls them three waves. The first wave is called the feminine. The feminine, she calls that phase where female writers are still writing the same way as men are writing. You can give me millions of examples in this kind of writing. Yes, for figuring out what writings do you find here, you have to go by the dates. This is where history becomes important. This is why we need history. This is 1840 to 1880. She says this is the time period in English writing where she finds that this period spanning between 1840 to 1880, which 1880 is marked by the death of George Eliot. As per her, this is the period when female writers are imitating male writers. You can give me names. This is also one of the features of this period is that females are making use of pseudonyms, where they don't want to appear onto the open public space that they as women are writing, because then nobody will marry them if they start entering into the male space which is meant for male writers. And also they use pseudonyms because publishers will not take their work if they get to know that this has been written by a woman. It be considered below standard to this day. Men consider that females will not be good at certain things, like they believe that females are not good at mathematics, right? So these stereotypical ideas at that time, the same idea was followed about writing, that females cannot write better than men. So what did they do? They try to use pseudonyms. Pseudonyms would either hide their gender or would not reveal it. Means it would make a publisher feel that the writer is a male or make it ambiguous that the name will not reveal if it's a male or a female. Say Currer Bell, Acton Bell, these names. Gender is not revealed in the name. So, can you give me the names? I'll give you the characteristics then. Give me names. Give me the names of writers at this time. She is an American. Louisa May Alcott is an American. So we're looking at English tradition. So what do you find in these writers? The stories that you find in Jane Austen is about a female protagonist who goes through um, a development of a child into an adult, and then she gets married. Where do you find these stories? You find these stories in all of these writers. All these writers are writing the same way, but you have already seen them from Samuel Richardson was already writing them. Is it Samuel or something else? Richardson. What's the first name of Richardson? What's the first name of Richardson? Meg, is it Samuel Richardson? The one who wrote Clarissa, Pamela, Samuel Richardson. So you have that tradition where a man is already writing about female growing from the state of a child to an adult and getting married. You have these examples. So what are they doing then? Jane Austen, George Eliot, Charles Bronte, Emily Bronte, they are writing in the same tradition. They have that tradition. They're not doing something that hasn't been done before. And in fact, Richardson's protagonists are females. Protagonists are females, and also the writing like that also figures in Henry Fielding in this time. This is the same time period, 1840, 1880s. Samuel Richardson and Henry Fielding are important writers of this time. Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, Joseph Andrews. This is the feminine stage. Let's go into the detail. What kind of uh, writing do you find in feminine state, where you also remember the most important feature is imitation? Other than that, Showalter says women writers in this stage, you can write this down. It's a quotation. Not a quotation, this is an important definition of this phrase. According to Showalter, women writers were united by their roles as daughters, wives, and mothers. So, what do you see? The same kind of daughter, wife, mother, these popular roles that she has to play. Because she has played the same roles in Richardson, in Fielding, so therefore she plays the same roles of a daughter, a wife, a mother in a Austen Eliot Bronte's. Okay, why do you see that even in female literary tradition the same happens? Because they are imitating, they have internalized these social roles. Like I told you, in the imitation stage they have internalized these social roles, so therefore they portray the same characters. The social roles have been internalized, and same are played by them in their novels and writings. Then, secondly, these are also the doctrines that are dictated by evangelicism. In evangelicism, also, a woman is only a good woman if she plays these roles the way a Christian daughter, wife, or mother ought to. And they do the same thing in FLT, Jane Austen, Eliot, Bronte. The next thing is that a female does not at this time uh, have any suspicion about the imagination of a man. So then there is not much flight of imagination by female writers, but what do? They continue to remain within those boundaries that are dictated by the social standards, which emphasizes upon their duty. In evangelical tradition, evangelical tradition emphasizes the duty of a person as per the social roles, which are also dictated legally, means the law dictates the same because law is based on church, and which is also dictated by the economical constraint that a female suffers from, that all women live by the money of their fathers, their brothers, and their husbands. And because of the same economical constraint, a woman is not able to move. Mobility is restricted for a female. So this is how it began, that females created that tradition of taking literature, literary writing as their profession, where women as writers and readers shared a covert solidarity as a daughter, a wife, a mother who is legally supposed to perform certain duties. The church dictates these duties for her, and she is not mobile. She cannot move out of those duties. It's interrelated. If she is not bound by economical constraint, if she is independent economically, she is mobile. She can move. She has that access to mobility because she has access to money. And if she does not have access to money, if she has economical constraint, what will happen? She will be bound by the church, by the duties, by the dictates of the church. So she will follow the social rules because that's the demand of the society she lives in. Any questions about the stage, the feminine phase? I'll take the questions because there's a lot of noise in the background. I cannot speak. So write your questions in chat. If there are no questions, let's move on to the second stage then. I'll clear the board. It's okay. Is it okay if I clear the board? I'm clearing the board. The second phase is feminist phase. This follows not the imitation, but the second point was protest. Now let's see how protest functions in the feminine phase. First of all, she traces it through history. So she gives you the dates when this begins and when this ends. The feminist stage begins in 1880, which is after the death of George Eliot, and continues till 1920. 1920 is the time when Virginia Woolf was writing. What happens in this period of time is that this period, which extends from 18 to 1920, is when women have already won. One of the right has been won, which is voting rights have been won. The female is now allowed to vote. And earlier on, she didn't even have access to her money if the money was transferred to her after marriage, that she could lay claim on the property rights of her uncle or aunt. It would directly transfer to her husband. She did not have any control, power over the money that was transferred to her legally. After marriage, it would directly go to her husband. So property rights were not there. But by this time, she also has the property rights along with the voting rights. So, what does a woman do in this time is that she has found that the circumstances around her are very repressive and they are very imposing. The social roles, the duty are of a very imposing nature, and this is what makes her rebellious. She tries to rebel against the repressive circumstances. What are imposing these repressive circumstances on her? It is the previous stage. The feminine stage has pressurized her too much, made her stick to that repressive role where she is economically dependent and dependent for various reasons. So, what does a female now do in her writing? She tries to find new, innovative ways in which she will express herself in a different way, which will be a dramatic way of a dramatic manner of depicting her inner life. Can you think of examples? There are many writers who are writing in this tradition where women are depicting their internal life and trying to do away with the repressive forces that are imposed by her from the male tradition. There is one character. I'll give you the characters that were not there in literature before. This time, this is 1880, 1920. One of the writer, very important writer of this time, is her name is Dina Craig. Dina Craig, in one of her novels, creates a character who is a crippled artist. So we do not have crippled artists so far. What is she trying to do? She is trying to dramatize her inner anxiety, repressed forces, and displacing these repressive ideas. What has been suppressed into the unconscious of the female literary tradition. So, how do you study psychology now? It's like a shared psychology of women. They have suppressed something and now they are creating crippled artists in their work. There is another one by Mary Braddon. She is another writer of this time, Mary Braddon. What does she do? She creates a character where the wife is murderous. So, this is how they are voicing against the repressive forces, creating new ways of dramatizing their inner life. This is what we want to do. We want to cripple that artist who is imposing boundaries onto us, imposing standards onto us. Or a wife that you want to be dutiful does not need to be dutiful always, she can be murderous too. This led to the creation of a fiction which was intense, it was compact, it was symbolic, and also profound, like you see even in Virginia Woolf. In Virginia Woolf, say in Mrs. Dalloway, you have a female um, who has lesbian relationships. She's a lesbian. She's a good wife. She is a mother, and she has her boyfriend also. She's living all these roles together in Mrs. Dalloway. So we are now presented in the second phase, feminist phase in 1880 and 1920s with such kind of a people like a mad wife in the attic, like we had in Jane Eyre. Rochester has put his wife, calling her mad, in the attic and locked her in the attic. But what happens in this period that this mad wife, she becomes the focus of attention, like in the writing. The name of the novel is Wide Sargasso Sea, where the same female becomes the protagonist. It's written by Jean Wise. So many different writers of this time, female writers, they offer fantasies of money and power. These are still fantasies. We'll see in the third stage that this has been acquired. Fantasies of having money and power is projected in the literature, and the elements of success are created in authors' own experiences, which are or whatever an author feels in herself. She portrays this onto the male characters. She displaces these ideas onto a male character. In Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, you see a male character is committing suicide, where the female herself is wishing, the writer author is wishing to commit suicide, and she ultimately does commit suicide in 1941. So, the protest fiction of this period, we find it champions the rights. It champions the rights not only for women, but they also champion the rights of workers, industrial workers, downtrodden proletariat. They are also working for uh, speaking against child labor, and also trying to search for the rights of the prostitutes. So it's not just about the rights of women that you knew about, it's about much more than that. So, women novel from Jane Austen to George Eliot had moved in the direction of an all inclusive female realism, as they called it. This is a realism, how we see the external reality we portrayed in art. But now it moves on to a broad, socially informed exploration of the daily lives and values of women within the family and within the community. That's what the feminist stage is about. Any questions? So basically, what we see in this stage is that male stereotyping is being disregarded. It's not just male stereotyping, which is in reference to the women, it's male stereotyping, but in reference to the workers, it's the standard set by the industrialists. It's in terms of child labor. Again, the capitalist is under attack. For prostitutes, again, the capitalist is under attack. Yeah, everything is interrelated. No theory is studied um, in a straitjacketed manner. That this theory stays here, the other theory stays in other parts. Like I said, like I gave you the concept of the unconscious, this is the collective unconscious we are studying. That all women so far have felt that we have been crippled. We have not been able to speak about our reality, which is this. Where was all this so far? This was repressed here. The unconscious is now coming out through the use of symbols. Like I said, this literature is quite symbolic, it's profound, it's deep. These are the characteristics. It's intense, it's compact. Why is it? Why does it have this language? Because it's coming from the repressed part, and it does not have a clear language that is understood by the conscious. But the language is always like this, so it will only give you signifiers, and there is no signified. There is no signifier. The object is not found. The woman herself has not found the object of desire. What do you see then? You only see signifiers. It's all interrelated. There is less than a minute left. We are left with one stage, one phase, which is female. We'll do that in our next session. The meeting will end soon. You can write your questions in the comment section on YouTube. I will not be able to take any question here. No, feminism is not Western.